Okay, welcome to week 2 of business plan development. What is due for this week? There's 2 different assignments due. The one assignment is the differentiation, where you'll do your SWOT analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I'll cover that at the end. But the 3 chapters you have to do are the target market, competition, and the marketing plan. The assignments for last week I should have done tomorrow, so we should be, if you haven't gotten it yet, got about half of them done. I'll try to get the rest of them done tomorrow on my day between classes. So go ahead and get this started. And there it goes. Okay, so 3 chapters this week are target market, competition, and the marketing plan. Target market basically is who it is that you're selling to. And just like the ground class, remember there could be 2 groups involved here, those that use your products versus those that buy your products. So you want to make sure that you make both of them happy. But remember, if even though your user is happy, doesn't mean that the person who's buying it will be happy. So make sure that you identify who it is that not only uses your product, but who buys your product. And we'll get into that a little bit. Competition is and again, I don't worry too much about the competition because most of you either work for them now or have worked with them in the past. So you've got a pretty good idea who you're going to be going up against, but we'll get into that as well. And then the last thing is your marketing plan and sales. And remember, marketing gets the people to the door, but it's the sales people that get the money out of their hands. So we'll try to differentiate between those 2 groups. I know you've had a lot of marketing through the program, but not a lot of sales. So think about, who it is that will actually finalize your deal. In other words, who is it that gets them to sign the contract? Who is it that gets them to pay for the product? That's the sales part of it. Not everybody's cut out for sales, but still got to have somebody to do it. So that may be your first hire. Who knows? But we'll dig into all 3 of these tonight. The target market. Target market is Target market is the people that are going to be buying your or consuming your product or service. What we'll do is we'll start with your 1-minute pitch. And if you look at the outline from the handout that I sent you at the beginning of class, it covers these bullets. But you'll start with your 1-minute pitch and then give me a description of your market. In other words, who is it that you are targeting? We had had gotten a note back from one of our students who sells a personal pepper spray. And one of the things he said is we were looking for 15 to 45-year-old males and females, even though he was primarily focusing to the females. But what he thought is that fathers and boyfriends would buy the pepper spray for their girlfriends or their daughters. And he had 5 daughters of his own, so he was developing the product for his own daughters to use. But the idea was that it's possible that these would be gifts as well as personal protection devices. So he had a pretty broad range of people. But what was interesting was when he started promoting it, especially online, because it was going out to the general population, he was having a problem with young males responding to the ads and saying, buy guns, learn karate, things like that. Well, if you when you look at Google and Google looks at who responds, that's who they end up shifting the advertising toward. And so he said it started off pretty good, but then all of a sudden there were so many young men that were responding to the negative. In other words, don't buy this for women, use something else. It skewed his marketing, and he says his sales went from about 2 to 1 to about 100 to 1 because the ads were going to websites that targeted young men. And so he says it was messing up his analytics. Now he found that people really needed to his people really needed to talk to the potential customers too, because it wasn't enough to see the ad. You had to be able to tell them or show them how the product worked. And he said it wasn't. He was very careful not to use advertising that showed really strong women that would punch or kick the assailant. These were women that basically needed some other form of protection. And so he looked at, again, his target was his customer was mostly young women. But he targeted he had two target markets, was them directly, and the other was people that would buy it for them as gifts. When you think about groupings, we also did a project with a group that did testosterone labs here in Orlando, and they were looking at 40 to 60-year-old males making over $100,000 a year, and the reason was because the service was about $400 a month to get the treatments. But what they did was they figured, okay, high income individuals are not going to want generic drugs, so they were using the label drugs. They also had doctors involved, so they got doctor visits on a regular basis. They had nurses doing the injections. So again, it was a high-end service. But once they started advertising, they started running into they started getting calls from firemen, policemen, and military who were turning 40 or older, but still had to maintain a certain condition. The problem was they didn't meet the income requirement. And so what do? Do you stay on target with your group? And again, it was paying the bills, but that was about it. But we saw this whole nother group of people that we could target with our service, but the problem was we had to cut the costs. So the company decided we'll set up another division. So we set up a subsidiary, which went after the 40 to 60-year-old males, but in public service. And we went to a generic drug, went to a self-injector, so you could treat yourself. You got one doctor visit or two doctor visits a year, and access to a nurse, but you didn't have regular monthly visits for follow-up. So again, we could cut the cost in half. So we ended up at about $200 a month, and that was more in their category. Things you got to be careful of is once you start promoting both of them, you don't want to lose your high-end people because they were paying twice as much. So they were trying to be very careful to just focus the targeting to these particular groups. And again, with the firemen, the policemen, and such, they all have trade associations, so those were pretty easy to locate. The ones that were a challenge were the higher income individuals. And what they found in Orlando was they worked in downtown Orlando, but that's not where they lived. So when you think about promotion, you had to think about where did they live. Well, they lived in Windermere in South Orlando. They lived up on in Lake Mary in the northern part of Seminole County. So they all used I-4. They all drove at about the same time, 6 to 9 in the morning, went home between 4 and 7 in the evening. So the company targeted their advertising in those time frames. So local radio, and what do people do when they're in the car? They listen to stations that are telling them weather and traffic. So ran those ads on those weather and traffic channels that were the most popular in Orlando. Bought advertising space along I-4, so the billboards coming into downtown in the mornings, leaving downtown in the evenings. So again, you have to think about where your customers are, how you're going to reach them. Because once you have them identified, that's the easy part. Hard part is finding them and getting to them. what is the commonality that you can find? Do they read a certain magazine? Do they all read a certain newspaper? Do they join different organizations? You think about chambers of commerce or the Elks or the VA. I mean the VA, but the Veterans of Foreign Wars. There's all VFW, and all of those are different groups that you can target, because again, most of these groups are looking usually have publications for their customers, or they're people that belong to their organizations, but they also make money by selling their names. So you can use them for mailings, you can use them for other types of contact, advertise in the publications that they put out. But again, think about how you're going to, once you've got your target market identified, how are you going to reach them? And we'll talk more about that when we get to marketing. But the main thing is what's a good description of your market. And you have to think about, is male and female a factor? Are they married or not? We did a project on strip clubs, and the numbers looked great, and everybody loved them when you made presentations. But at the meetings they'd go, but I have to be able to experience it. And he says, if I do that, my wife will kill me. And so it was like we had to target women and single men, because the married men were a little leery of investing in something like that. So you have to think about, are there social things? Are there religious things that might affect your particular target market? But again, just think about what it is that's a commonality or a common trend in your particular market. We think about what part of the country they live in, what type of cars they drive, where do they shop. All those kinds of things are part of your target market. So figure out how much, who they are. If you have competitors, talk to your competitors, find out who they target. If you can find a competitor that's maybe not in your market, most of them have websites. Go on the website and see who they say their market is. Radio stations and newspapers, TV stations. All of them are trying to sell advertising. Well, if you're going to be competing with them, you can ask them what do your ad sheets look like, which will tell you, and will give you an idea of what the target market is that they're not only targeting, but also who is it that is actually listening to them, because they have groups like Arbitron who are tracking them. So again, there's lots of sources out there. Once you've got your numbers, now you got to figure out excuse me, you got to figure out how many of them there are, because not only do you need to know who they are, but you got to know that there's enough of them out there to keep your company going. If you if you do one off, in other words, you sell once, you never see the customer again, now you're having to buy every customer. But if you get repeat customers, like a beauty shop, they want them to come back every 2 or 3 weeks. And nail salons. Think about those groups that live off of repeat customers. Restaurants. But again, the thing you have to understand is will that group keep coming back? And then the trend side of it is as their demographic changes, they get older, they get married, they go to school and get a college degree or something like that. Will that change whether they buy from you or not? Because those are the trends. So again, study your target market as best you can. Along that line, I like to use Justin Bieber as an example. Justin Bieber, when he first started, was a YouTube sensation, but he was young. But he knew that one of the best target markets out there was young girls 10 to 12 years old, and that was his target market. It worked great until he got to about 18 years old, and he went, oh, I don't like these young kids anymore. Well, really, they didn't like him more than he didn't like them, but the two of them grew apart. But At the same time, he understood that was a great market. Because if you look at a show, they never go by themselves. They either go in a group or they have to take their parents with them because they're 10 to 12 years old. That means 2, 3, 4 ticket sales, not just one. They buy, T-shirts, hats, albums, music. They do all of that stuff, and so they were a great market. Problem was they didn't like him anymore. But his manager, who also manages Psy from Korea, realized that the K-pop was coming, and so they actually started investing in K-pop groups because he says, well, if they're not going to like me, at least I can make money off of them. So think about what are the trends in your particular industry. Are you going to have to change with them, or will people coming up backfill the people that are leaving? You can look at population numbers and find out in where you're going, how many 10 to 12-year-olds there will be in 2 years, in 4 years, and 6 years. And if you know if that's going to stay true, will they be able to replace your customers that may be moving out? But those are the trends that they want to know. They want to know that this is going to last. We had a student who was selling Florida Chads during the election, and what that was during the Bush election, where he won by winning Florida. Florida was using computer cards. When you voted, you put the computer card in the machine, you punched a hole in it, and it punched out a little piece of paper, which was called a Chad, and then you ran it through a computer scanner, when that's how they counted the votes. Well, it became a big issue when the election was so close that it actually ended up at the Supreme Court. Well, for 3 months, it was in limbo. During those 3 months, he put together bottles of Florida Chads, basically bought a bunch of Chads from IBM, put them in bottles, put on their official Florida Chads, and sold them down by Disney. Made about $150,000 in 3 months. But after 3 months, it was done. So he knew that he'd have to come up with another idea, because once the Supreme Court said, hey, everything's great, you won, people would stop buying them, and they did. But the thing is he saw an opportunity, but he also knew that it was short-lived. And that's what you have to tell people. And again, your investors won't care if it's short-lived or short-lived, because you told them, and they know 3 months we're going to make money. After that, we'll find something else to invest in. And your investors, you make them happy on your first deal. Guess who's going to be the first person in line in your second deal? That's your previous investor. So again, think about getting as much information together as you can, because your investor is going to want to make sure that you understand who you're dealing with. How are you going to target those customers? Like I said, we found that the best time to hit them was drive time. So we hit them with the radio and with the billboards coming from both directions into downtown. And when they left, we did the same thing. TV, and executives don't spend a lot of time on TV or listening to radio at home, and so that wasn't even an option for us. But we knew that they were going to have to be in their car driving to or from home at a certain time during the day. So that worked out pretty well. It also created a second market for us, because those people, those public service people, ended up creating a new market for us. But again, how are you going to reach them? What is it that's a commonality that they have? Do they all read a trade magazine? Do they all read a newspaper? Because again, you have to be able to reach them. It's not enough just to identify them. You also have to figure out, how am I going to let them know what I do, so they'll come and buy from my company? Or how will I get them to just show up at the door? So again, targeting the customers. Think about what is it that you can do to get them to locate them. The market readiness, what that is what you're doing. Is the market ready for you, or Are you ready for it? In other words, if things take off, have you got the capability to service them? Can you grow the company? Can you manufacture more product? A good example of that's the Pebble watch. When the Pebble watch started, it went on Kickstarter. They were trying to raise $100,000. They figured, okay, we'll sell $100,000 worth of watches, and we'll design it, build it. It'll be great. Well, on Kickstarter, they raised $10 million. So it was, 1,000 times better than what they originally planned. And basically, it was one of those uh-oh things where the manufacturer that they had picked out couldn't handle that increased manufacturing need. So they had to go to figure out another manufacturing option or turn down the sales. People don't want to turn down sales, so they ended up having to go find a larger manufacturer to make their watches so they could meet their delivery guidelines. There's lots of people on Kickstarter that if it takes off, they just aren't prepared, and that's what they want to do, is make sure that if good things happen, you're ready for it. But the main thing that they want to do is make sure that there are people that want your product. This is why even on Shark Tank, first question they always ask you is, do you have customers? Because they want to make sure somebody wants your product and is willing to pay for it. People will come up with ideas and they'll go, but the world will love it. Well, how do you know? You're not the target market. In most cases, it's other people. So you got to, they love it when you have competition, which we'll get into next, because then they know there is a market for that particular product. So again, make sure that the market's ready for you and that you're ready in case the market takes off. You've got procedures in place. And the last thing there is strategic opportunities. In other words, what part of this target market are you going to target first? In our case, we were looking at 40 to 60-year-old males. Well, the age, it actually, if you look at the research, it said that men start losing their testosterone at 30. So that first 10 years, that's an additional market for later. Florida's full of retired people, so people over 60 are probably, in active communities are probably going to be interested. We cut it off because of the cost. And so once they came up with that lower end product, it made it interesting for people that are retired, that may be living on a fixed income. They might be willing to pay $200 a month, where but we figured, well, after they retire, they're not going to care and they're going to stop using it. So that's what that's kind of the way that they had structured it. But again, those were other opportunities that were coming down the road that we could do. And again, we found that we had to go. They wanted to go into the public market too. And again, when you talk to your investors, they're going to want to make sure you're capable of doing that. Do you have the companies lined up to be able to prescribe these drugs to people? Because again, these are prescription type drugs, and they have to set the dosage. But they want to make sure you can handle the numbers that you think you can have. Now, we spent a lot of time talking to companies that did the same thing in other states that were not direct competitors. But that's where we got our numbers. Their websites, and just talking to them, that 40 to 60, $100,000 was the sweet spot. You can go on both sides, and like I said, we ended up doing that too. But they want to know what's your best market. Are there enough people there? And then from then you can expand out. If the first one works, now you can go and get those other groups. But those are the opportunities they're going to be looking for. Are there going to be more opportunities for you? Where else can you use your product? If you look at drugs, ones like Botox, they were cosmetic drugs that got rid of wrinkles. But what they found out, that it also helped cure migraines. So this was another opportunity to sell the product. that came out of just using it with your customers. Because, you've built features into what you do. Now you got to think about what are the benefits they're getting out of it. That's what they're going to, and you have to, find out how they're using your products and services. It may be something you've never thought of, but if you don't talk to your customers and keep in contact with your customers, you never know. But it could create a new market for you. So that's where the opportunities come in. I like to hear something about how you're going to keep in touch with your target market. You're going to use forums and blogs, Yelp. Um, are you going to have a Facebook page? How are you going to keep in touch with your customers and get feedback from your customers? And, are you going to have a bonus system, or like McDonald's does a thing where if you go on their website and post a survey, you get a discount or a free hamburger or whatever. Same thing. You can do the same thing, but you've got to get that feedback, because, they say now that 90% of all purchases start online. First thing people do is get onto Google and Google that I'm looking for a car, or I'm looking for a recording studio, I'm looking for somebody to film my wedding. Well, they're going to do it through Google. That's where they've got to find you, and they've got to find information out on you. So how are you going to do that? And that's part of your target market plan. The second chapter is your competition. And again, I don't worry too much about competition, because most of you have worked for them before. But think in terms of who it is that, I put them into two categories. One is the people you think about every day. In other words, you wake up every morning and you wonder if people are going to pick you or Joe's recording studio, which is next door. Could be right next door in the next mall. But think about who you compete with directly or locally versus who you compete with for dollars. Because remember, you're in that disposable income area. In other words, you're not something that's essential to life. In most cases, it's something that people choose to do, which makes you part of the disposable income crowd. And people have money piles for their rent and for their food, for their transportation, and then there's us. That's your disposable income. So you have to think about, who's taking money out of that pile. If you're in the entertainment business, you don't bring that Maroon 5 to town. But if your customers or your target market goes there, it's taking money out of that pile. It's not a direct competitor, but Live Nation, you do compete with it. And if you don't mention them, I can tell you the investors will investors know the big players. They're going to say, but what about these guys? Well, we don't compete with them directly. We know we compete with them for dollars, but in the local market, they're not an issue. But you have to address, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. So anyway, competition. Start with your pitch, and tell me what different categories. How are you organizing your competitors? Those you compete with directly, those you compete with for dollars, those that could become competitors. Now, those three groups are very important to investors, because they like to know who on a daily basis do you compete with, who is it you compete with for dollars, who, if they see you making money, might try to get into your space. So those are the kinds of things that they worry about. So think about your categories. Specifically, I look for at least two local competitors. So there's usually at least two people that you think about on a daily basis. Or, like I said, when you wake up, get ready to go to work, who do you drive by that you think of? Somebody who runs a McDonald's probably drives by a Wendy's, a Burger King, a Chipotle. They're your lunch and, breakfast, lunch, and dinner competitor. And that's what they're that's what they're thinking about. But think about those two, and how are you going to compete with them? What do you do that's better than them? What is it that they do? They're most of them will, they're just like you. They're going to be out on the web. You're going to be able to see what people say. They're slow getting the masters to you. They're hard to get a reservation to record in their studio. They have a problem finding session musicians. All of those things are they may be things that your target market is concerned about. But again, you have to talk to the target market, find out what it is that they think is good, what is it they think is bad. But but identify at least two of them. Tell me how you're going to compete with us. What are their strengths and weaknesses? How are you going to take advantage of any weaknesses that they have, or how do you mitigate their strengths? In other words, what can you do if they're like we have a studio here in Orlando called Plush, and they've got gold records on the wall. There's famous people that come there and record, but they're running off for reputation. They you can rent it, but if you want an engineer, you got to bring your own engineer. So people that actually made the records are gone, but they have a great reputation or a great name, and so people are willing to rent it. Why would why not come to me? Why go to a studio that yeah, it's got a great reputation, but it's not as good as what we do. And when you talk to people, the same thing happens when they record. People think I've got a laptop and a microphone. Why can't I record? I have GarageBand. I can do this. Yeah, you can, but what's the difference between what you can produce on your laptop versus what you can produce in the studio? We do that all the time when we do presentations. We say, just take two pieces of music, record them both places, show what the difference is if you're in your studio. What does it sound like that's different? And be able to show that versus, if they record it themselves and post it up on CD Baby and then they complain that nobody wants to buy their music because it's scratchy or noisy, or the dog's barking in the background, all those kinds of things that happen at home. But again, all we're trying to do is say, who is it you compete with? How do you compete with them? The national chains, again, if you have one big player, you think about events, you think of Coachella, you think of music, you think of BMI, or you think of Live Nation. All of those are big competitors you compete with for dollars. But if you have to mention them, you don't have to say a lot about them. You can basically say, well, I don't directly compete with them. Yes, they do, 5 events a year in Orlando. I know my clients, my target market likes to go to these events, but they're not a direct competitor. But you have to address them, because if you don't, I can tell you the investors bring them up. So you got to at least address them in some way. How much of the market do you think you can get? That's that market share distribution. In other words, how is it divided up now? And then how much of it do you think you can get? Because again, if you show your competitors and they're 50-50 on the recording and you're now the third wheel, are you going to be able to get a third of the business? Or is it something that's going to take time to develop? But they like to know who has what in your marketplace. Your advantages over your competition. Again, when you do your SWOT analysis, one of the things you're going to show is your strengths. Think about what are your strengths versus your competitors. Why are they going to come to you and not go to them? Because again, they have choices and they can make that choice. And even if you're the only person in town, they might go an hour to Atlanta to record if they think that they do a better job. But you've got to be able to tell them what is the advantage of of recording with you or dealing with you versus going somewhere else to do the same thing. It might be, again, it's local. It might be that you have the same equipment as they would be able to get somewhere else. Your engineers are just as experienced. You might have some great session musicians. That was one thing that Bill Thompson next month will talk to you about. I mean, in the church where he plays at bass, he said the musicians there are phenomenal. But he says they knew that they weren't going to make a living off of it. A lot of them were Juilliard trained singers, and he says they can sing as well as anyone he's heard, but they're going, we know we can't make money at it, so we do other things. And but those people help him out when he's doing recordings and things like that. But sometimes you might have talent in your area that just wants to work part-time. That could be your competitive advantage. Competitive positions, how do you compete with each of these competitors? Again, that SWOT analysis. uh, compare and contrast with each of your competitors. In other words, why would they come to you versus go to them? um, Highlight your strengths, mitigate your weaknesses. In other words, anything that you consider a weakness, uh, I can tell you your competitors will know them and they'll try to take advantage of them. How will you keep those from getting losing your business? But again, all that is a competitive, that's the competitive analysis. That's that differentiation. So it'll be very similar to that assignment that you have coming this week as well. Uh, so competitive position, then barriers to entry. Investors like to know that it might be difficult for somebody, if they see you're being successful, to get into your business. And that's what the barriers to entry are. Is it education? Is it equipment? Is it available locations? Is it talent in your area? What is it that's gonna keep somebody from doing what you do, especially quickly? Yeah, it might take them 5 years to go to full sail, get a degree, and come out and open up a business. But think about what are all of those things that are going to keep them out of your space. You had to work hard to get where you are. You don't want anybody to come in and just take your market away from you. So think about what barriers you can construct. Um, there are industries where they've gone to their legislature and said, "Well, if we're going to be successful, we need to make sure that we can control the number of people that are in our industry." And they actually have gotten the legislatures to say, "We agree with you, so you guys have to approve any of these new companies before we'll give them licenses." That happened in Tennessee, I think it was, Tennessee or Kentucky, with moving companies. The moving companies got together with their legislators and said, "Look, there's 4 or 5 of us out here. That's enough for the state. We don't think anybody else should get a license." And they got their legislators to pass the law that said no new moving companies unless it's approved by the moving association, which was made up of all of your competitors. And so basically they shut the door on anybody new setting up a company that does moving in Tennessee. That can happen, but that's a great barrier to entry if you're on the other side. You're not the new guy, but you're the old guy. You're basically telling the rest of the people, you can't come in here and work. Um, but again, that's kind of a rare one, but it has happened. Strategic opportunities. Again, think about with your competitors. What opportunities do you see to take business away from them? Because that's where most of your business is going to come from. They have established target markets. They have a target market. They're the same market as you. They're your best targets is the people that are already using a similar product. So how do you plan to approach those? How do you plan to compete with those competitors to get market share away from them? And that's always a fun one to play with because you can try lots of things. I always say, look at your competitors, find out where their weaknesses are. Again, the older they are, the more set in their ways there are. And the question is that what your customers want? Do they want a company that's flexible versus rigid with, authoritative methods where they're charging you for every little thing? where you're saying, okay, we're going to have your recording done for X number of dollars, no matter how long it takes. You may do something like that, where your competitors are going, okay, you got a 2-hour window, and then we're shutting it down. And so that flexibility might be your advantage over your competitors. And again, the older they are, the more rigid they become, the more rules they put into place, and you're willing to take that, do that extra work to get that customer. So again, once you study your competitors, think about what it is that might set you apart from them. I always look for competitors that are going through change. They're either moving locations, they're going to a new technology, or they're changing management. In all those cases, a lot of work doesn't get done because they're busy doing other stuff. Their target market tends to feel ignored. And so it's an opportunity for you, and so you can watch out for things like that as an opportunity, especially with older companies where you've got, somebody that's in their 70s or 80s, and, they're going to retire and somebody else is going to take over. Well, everybody's either trying to get that job or they're afraid to do anything until the new boss gets in place. And so again, you have to, if you know the company, you're going to know how they're going to react, how the company's going to react. In a lot of cases, the last person who gets anything is the customer. The company just kind of like freezes. And so we've seen that with companies when senior management changes, because not only does the CEO change, but everybody below him does. And so you have to be real careful with this. But it is an opportunity for you as a player in your industry that you start ignoring your customers, and you're giving your competitors an opportunity to take them away from you. The third chapter is your marketing plan. Again, start with your pitch. Then tell me how you're different. Again, some of this stuff is a repeat. We were talking about that in competitives, but now we're looking at it in terms of marketing. So how are you different? In other words, how are you going to advertise yourself? It's not some of the things you might put in your competition chapter, I would never put in a marketing release. But think about what things you can put in. You have newest technology. You have 3 recent, full cell grads that from the recording arts division, and they were, and you say things like they were trained by Grammy-winning instructors. All those kinds of things are great advertising mechanisms. So again, what is it that you've got that you can promote that's different than your competitors? So that's what you're going to start with. Then talk about your customers' needs. Again, you have to have a message. It's not enough just to say, okay, here I am. You see people do that with stores all the time, or restaurants. They open up and go, here I am. And people go, well, so, how are you going to get those people in the door, the first people in the door? You see the promotions, you see the discounts, you see all types of advertising that they'll do to get those people in the door the first time. You got to get them to come. You got to get them to show up. It's not enough to just say you're there. You've got to do something to get them to come to your facility. And like I said, if you don't have some type of a message, you think about all the sayings that are out there, like "Just do it" with Nike, "Don't leave home without it" with American Express. There's "Think Different," which was I think that was Volkswagen, if I remember correctly. But there's sayings out there's a message out there that people will remember and resonate with them, and that's what you're looking for. So think about what it is that you can say that makes you stand out. I kind of move the sales toward the end. I know it's up here in this one, but I think in my one online on my worksheet there toward the end. So I'm going to skip over those and go to advertising. Key thing I look for in advertising. I know you did this in your digital marketing class, and you can use the same material again because this is a summary of your program. But think about at least one traditional advertising method. It could be as simple as handing out brochures at a meeting, attend a outdoor event, uh, put stickers or magnets on your car, do radio, TV, bus advertising, cab advertising. There's all kinds of things you can do. But again, don't rely just on social media. I always, what people tell me is it's great to have social media, but somebody has to know that you're there. And that's where some traditional marketing comes in. Now, you can budget for it. If you don't need it, you get to stick that money back in your pocket. But if you don't ask for it, it won't be there if you need it. So ask for some traditional marketing. Uh, Things like TV advertising and radio advertising tend to be fairly expensive. You may not have the money for that, but think about what you can do to at least test market. If you can go on TV, you can go to the local cable company, and for about $4 an ad, you can get ad space on the cable channels. Now, it's not going to be the same as being on, Grey's Anatomy or something like that, but the 30-second ads on those are about $450,000 for 30 seconds. So you're not going to be spending that kind of money. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. I got a message here. No, use the same one. I want you to use the same one for everyone because it's laying the groundwork for your company. The reason we do it primarily is that when investors look at your plan, they have people for each of the sections, and so those people are going to be handed that chapter, and if they don't know what the story of your company is, they don't know whether the information you're putting in here makes sense. So we do that pitch so that they know the who, what, where, when, why, and how of your company before they get into how you're going to market it, how you're going to look for competition, who you're competing with. They've got all that information. So we do the same paragraph for each chapter. I'm getting back to it. No, SWOT is only the detailed SWOT is just going to be a separate exercise. But you'll use pieces of it in about half of your business plan, because you're going to look at your strengths and your weaknesses are the two things that make or break your company. The opportunities and threats, which we'll get into also, are things you can't really control. Those are external factors. You just need to be aware of them and be prepared if something happens. But think about when you would talk about your strengths, like in marketing. Those strengths are what's going to sell your customers, get them to come to your door. If you can, it's one of them you've been looking at your Jason Whitmore links. When he got started, he was a motion graphics artist consultant, but he said, "There's more money in this than what I'm getting paid. I know these companies that hire me are making good money, so why can't I make that money?" So he decided to start his own company. But what he realized pretty quickly after that is that how do you get to those companies? How do you get on their list as to be considered for bidding? And so, yes, he understood that there was more money, but he didn't realize how to get to the people. And that's where his promotion, his strength was that he put together a really good team of mentors. Uh, who knew the industry, so they could kind of introduce him to the people that did the buying of the services. So he kind of got into that. But if he had just started on his own and he put his shingle out on the door, nobody would know who he was, except that because they didn't know him. They knew the company they hired, and that company hired him. So he was kind of starting from scratch. So he was on the web. He was putting YouTube videos together. He was promoting himself through different trade groups and at different meetings. Because again, almost all your ad groups have uh, publications and associations and award shows, and he was trying to make himself known through all of these different types of media. How are they going to find that he's doing it on his own? Now, his advantage he had was that Nike knew who he was, and when he started off on his own, Nike had a new promotion coming out, and the people that were putting together the computer graphics really screwed it up. And they said, we have 2 weeks before we're supposed to have a worldwide release. We need somebody to fix what these people did. And they knew him, and his friends recommended him, and so Nike had called him, and he says, we can do it. He says, I didn't know if we could do it or not, but this was our shot. And as a result, they ended up winning some awards for this presentation they put together in 2 weeks. But he says, we basically worked 24 hours a day for 2 weeks, had to catch up with somebody who had screwed it up for 6 months. But we knew that the client had to have it. And they trusted us to do it, and we proved ourselves. And again, once you've proven yourself, that's your client for life. And then the people that see it go, who did this? And so your name gets out there. But you have to think about, how is that first client going to find you? And that's where that message comes in, and that's where the advertising comes in. You have to think about, where can I promote myself? Kip Roddenberry is one of our graduates as well as one of our instructors on campus. He was doing pharmaceutical sales conventions. And what he found is these people were scattered all over the world. So TV and radio were out. But he found that the only commonality between them was they all read 2 pharmaceutical magazines. So guess where he puts his advertising? He puts it on those 2 pharmaceutical magazines and about a half a dozen pharmaceutical websites. He buys space on those. But he knew that there was the other traditional advertising wasn't going to do him any good. They didn't read their mail, so direct mail didn't work, and email is filtered out for most people. So he said the only thing that he found that worked was print advertising in trade magazines. So you'll have to you'll try different things, but you need the money to do that, and then you find the one that works for you. When we did work in the Midwest with farmers, the only thing common with them was the rural mail service. Everybody gets mail in the United States. So now we had to find lists. So we went to the farm magazines and bought their lists, and then started mailing to farmers, all across the United States. And we would send out 100,000 pieces of mail and get a 0.4% return, or 40 subscribers out of 100,000. But they made us $60,000 because they paid $1,500 for a newsletter. Cost us $25,000 in those days to mail that. Today, you're looking at least twice that. But think about, where is your target market located? If you're regional, you can go to the post office and put a flyer in every mailbox, because they'll tell you what zip codes are in the area that you're in. Like if you're like in this case, it was a restaurant. We were trying to target the housing areas in the area. Went to the post office and said, hey, we want to put a flyer in all these mailboxes. They said, no problem. Get us the flyers. It'll cost you X. And one of them got, a flyer got in every mailbox. But you can go to the post office. They're the ones who know where everybody lives. And Amazon did the same thing when they were starting. They went to the post office and said, "You guys know where everybody lives, and you're not using your trucks on Sunday. How would you like to make a little extra money?" They went, "Sure." And so they started using them for their 1 and 2 week delivery. Now that they're down to 2 day and 2 hour delivery, they're having to you know use you know drivers and stuff. But what's been interesting is if you ever look at jobs in the United States, the number one job in every state is truck driver, because everybody wants home delivery now. Well, somebody's got to drive that last leg from the warehouse to the home, and that's been the problem. Is there aren't enough people that are, commercially certified to do deliveries. The way they got around that with Uber is they just basically said anybody who wants to can be an independent contractor. We're a software company, and you guys are doing the deliveries, the people deliveries. Now they've had their problems, and Amazon's had their problems, but now they're looking at drone delivery. They're looking at there's all kinds of things that they can try, but the biggest problem is getting it to the home and getting it into the home. If somebody's not there, how do you get them? How do you get your product into the house and don't get it stolen off your porch? But think about what traditional advertising that you can do, and again, budget for it. If you're the great social media person and you don't need it, you put the money back in your pocket. But if you don't budget for it, you don't have it if you need it, especially if you're going to investors, because that's part of our budget is your marketing. You need to think about how much you're going to spend. Now, in most businesses, small businesses spend about 10 to 20% of their sales on marketing. So if you expect to sell $100,000 worth of product a year, expect to spend 10 to 20 grand on marketing. And investors understand that, and they're gonna make the money available to you when you need it to promote your company. But they know it takes money to make money, and you're going to have to advertise somewhere because nothing happens by magic. So that's a big thing for them, is they understand your business. They know you're going to have to spend some money to promote yourself, because again, you're the new kid in town, and so they're gonna make the money available. But if you don't ask for it, it won't be there. And if you do need it, now you got to go back to that investor and go, I was wrong. That's one of the words they don't like to hear, is "I was wrong." Words I don't want to hear is "I was wrong." The But after you get your people to the door, that's the marketing. Think about who's going to take the money out of their hands. Now, the main things I look for here is what is how does that money transfer? It was we had a group of my daughter's friends at dinner the other night, and I said, "I'll just pay for it. You guys pay me." And they go, "Do you do Venmo?" I go, "What's Venmo?" And again, Venmo, I understand that my daughters use it, but you know, the way people move money these days is very different. So think about how that money is going to come to you. Are they going to pay you for services? They're going to pay you in advance? Are you going to sell them product directly to the customer or to a intermediary? You sell. I have these. Well, let's say a mouse. If you make a mouse, do you sell it directly to the customer? Or do you sell it to Staples, and then they sell it to the customer? Well, again, you're talking about a business to business sale, not a business to customer sale. It's a different sales mechanism. Are you going to actually take the money from the customer? Or are you going to be billing them? Are you going to take credit cards? All of these things are things that they're going to want to know, because everything's got a cost. Credit cards, you're going to give up 2.5 to 3% of each sale to the credit card company. And they understand that, but they want to know if you're going to do that or you're going to be cash only. They also want to know that because Now they're going to wonder how you're going to track it all. And they want to know what financial controls are in place. There was a Nissan dealer down by the school, and the controller there had a gambling problem. And but the owner trusted her and said no problem. And didn't know about the gambling problem, but she managed the money. Well, she used to give herself bonus checks because she was gambling and losing money. And when they caught her, she'd taken $250,000 out of the company. The owner said, "Wait a minute, you were stealing my money." She goes, "No, I have a gambling problem. So I was giving myself extra bonuses." And they said, "Well, we want the money back." She goes, "I have a gambling problem. It's all gone." So the owner sued her. The police said, "Did she have the authority to write the checks?" "Absolutely." "Well, it's not criminal." So he says, "I'll sue you in civil court." So sued her in civil court and won. And the court said, "Pay back the $250,000. She goes, "I don't have it. I have a gambling problem." And they said, "Well, we'll take your assets." She goes, "I don't have any assets. I was driving a company car, living in an apartment. I have some furniture. That's about it." So once the judgment was made against her, she declared bankruptcy and wiped it out. But again, what they're going to want to make sure that their money's being handled properly. If you've ever dealt with attorneys, I know the attorneys that we use, every money, all the money that came in, all the money that went out had to be logged by at least two of the attorneys. In other words, there were at least two signatures on every check, two signatures on every deposit statement. That way, at least two members of the group knew what was going on. But they're going to want to know who handles the money and how it's handled. But the main thing is how's the money come in? Are they paying by the hour? Are they paying 50% in advance? Are you bidding projects where they pay it up front? Are they paying it at the end? They're going to want to know how the money flows and who it is that handles that money. You may have a sales group. I have a guy online I like to follow called Victor Antonio. He's got a whole string of sales things, but he does this thing called Mount Nut. And that is when you do sales, why is it that people buy or don't buy? And first is money. But he says usually if you can show them they're going to make more money by using your product or service, money's not an issue. Time, and again, if you can show them that efficiency is a big thing with investors. If you can show that you're more efficient than your competitors, you can do more turnover, seat more people, sell more product. They're going to love you. So time's usually not an issue. Need, do they really need the product right now? That's something you have to establish, that they do. If they do need this because their current systems are antiquated, out of date. Urgency, do they really have to do it right this second? And again, unless you can show that urgency, and again, sometimes you might run it as a special, a discount. If you buy now, you've heard these, online. They always when you try to leave a website, "Oh, you're leaving. Hey, what if we give you a 10% discount? Will you stay and buy the product?" Again, they're trying to create urgency in that case. If you don't buy now, you don't get the discount. And unfortunately, people get used to that. I actually had a website that did just the opposite one time. Every time you went back, they knew your IP address, so they'd raise the price. They said, "Say, we told you we were the cheapest. Now you've lost that first benefit. Buy now." And if you go away again and come back, they raise the price again. And it was kind of funny. But it's those are the kinds of things you've got to think about. What is this going to motivate them to buy? So think about, are you going to have a sales team, salesmen, cash, people at a cash register? Are you going to have a billing agent? What are you going to do to get the money? how's that money gonna come in? So again, those are the three chapters. Target market is who you're selling to. Tell me as much as you can about them. The competition is mostly who is it that you think about every day when you go to work that uh, might take customers away from you, or that you might take customers away from. Those are the direct competitors. So at least two of those, and at least one big player in your industry. Now, those indirect competitors, the other thing you can think of if you need to, who might get into your space. We were doing that with, we had a girl who was teaching guitar lessons to people with autism, because it's shown to be very effective in helping people that are autistic. But but a place like Guitar Center doesn't really teach those lessons. But if they saw there was an opportunity, sure, they could probably do that because they have people that are probably qualified. But they don't do it now. Those are also indirect competitors. If you can't find like a big player in your space, that would be one to use as an indirect competitor. In the marketing, key thing I look for here is differentiation. What is it that you're promoting that's going to get people to buy your product instead of your competitors? Where are you spending the money? Have at least one traditional source, TV, radio, billboards, flyers, something that's different than just social media, because you got to get those people to go to social media to find you. Those testosterone people I was telling you about, one of the things they did was that they knew that they needed to be in the top 10 of Google when people looked for testosterone treatments in Orlando. So they found a company in Stanford that said, we'll make sure you're in the top 10 of Google, but it's going to cost you $1,600 a month. A lot of money. But they also knew that 90% of people start on the web and 80% of the people never go past the first page of Google. Again, statistics, you can live and die by them. But what they found was that you had to be on that first page, and not an ad, but but in the search engine part. And so the Stanford people knew how the algorithms worked, because they had people in that in the search engines, and so they made sure that your website would show up in that top 10. If not, you didn't have to pay them. But they knew that their clients had to be on that first page based on their keyword searches. But again, it costs money. Are you going to make that money back? And that's a big deal. And then the last thing there was sales mechanism. How, and again, mostly what I'm looking for there are financial controls. Who handles the money? How much money? Uh, uh, are there any checks and balances? But the main thing is how does the money actually transfer from the customer to the company, and who is it in the company that handles it? If it's just you don't really have a choice in the matter, do you? It's you. But they like to know that there are some checks and balances. You have an accounting firm that double checks your work. Your banker is helping you provide analytics for your company as far as your sales information. Because one of the things we used to track a lot with farmers was farmers always did everything themselves. Question is do they do it efficiently? And so we would break the farm into income areas and look at, well, if I'm doing my own tractor repair, if I go to the repair facility, it's $150 an hour. But how much money do I save if I do it myself versus my time if I were out planting crops or taking care of the cows or whatever? Is it really worth it for me to do that task? And that's one thing those numbers will tell you when your sales come in. Is it a good thing to do, a 360 program, or do I want to farm out their recording studio because I have competitors in the area that are cheaper and they do just as good a work, but I'd have more time going out and finding clients if I didn't do the recording too. Those are the kinds of things they're going to want you to think about. What are you good at? What are your efficiencies? And so start trying to think about those. But these are the three chapters for this week. The other thing that's new is your differentiation. And what I want you to do with this is do a SWOT analysis. If you want to do pest, it's up to you, but I don't really like the pest as much as I like the SWOT, which is political. I can't even remember what pest is, but I know you did those in some of your previous classes. But SWOT is the one everybody knows. Your strengths and weaknesses; those are things you can control. So these are things like your strengths are education, equipment that you can buy. Uh, those are things that you may have that are better than your competitors. Your weaknesses, the only thing when you put a negative into writing, make sure you offer a solution. So if you're not good at finance, that might be your weakness, but you're going to hire an accounting firm to take care of that. So it is a weakness now, but you have a solution to it, or you're going to hire an accountant for the company. But again, you have to be able to identify your weaknesses, and because those are the kinds of things that your competitors are doing this to you too. They're going to be looking for your chinches in your armor so they can come in and take customers away from you. So any weaknesses that you can identify, you can offer solutions to. Yeah, you might not be able to do it this year, but you're going to address it in the future. But it also shows that you're thinking about what's good and what's bad in your company, not just that we're going to go, balls to the walls and just run as fast as we can and hope everything works out. Because the investors are going, but it's my money. I want to make sure that you're doing things right. So again, strengths, those are things you can control. Weaknesses, those are things you can control too, because you can offset them. The opportunities and threats, those are what we call external. And what those are, you have opportunities might be that there's new equipment being developed. Think about the Red Cam, how that 4K video changed the way movies are made. That you could almost get the quality of celluloid. But you didn't develop the equipment. But it could affect your target market because they may want higher quality. So you may have to, that technology, if it changes and you're left with your old system, that might become an advantage for your competitors. The threats, those are things like legislation. It could be economic problems. One of the things when we do these in class, we look at Disney, and one of their opportunities are that they can do acquisitions. They can go out and buy other companies. They did that with the Star Wars franchise. They did that with the Marvel franchise. They didn't develop them themselves, but they saw the opportunity to bring them into their fold. What are they good at? Their strengths are marketing. They basically went into those groups and said, okay, what can we do? What can we promote? And built merchandise around them. I mean, they were talking about when Frozen came out, they sold $1 billion worth of merchandise before the movie came out because they did it around Halloween. So they had all the costumes done and everything, and they were already promoting the movie. They sold almost $1 billion worth of merchandise before the movie came out. But Disney is great at merchandising. Their weaknesses are that they have a lot of stuff. They have 149,000 employees. Guess what? Those people want to get paid every week. So you've got to have cash flow. You've got to have, be able to pay those people in all those locations. But that's one of their weaknesses. If the economy goes bad, what do? Do you lay people off or do you continue to pay them? Because again, they've got a certain amount of money they got to pay. A lot of the theme parks. I mean, the people that the states they're in, the counties they're in, they're going to want to get their property taxes. Their people are going to want to get paid. That's a problem. But they don't control the economy. That's a threat. But at the same time, they do have a lot of employees, so that's kind of a weakness because those people are going to want to get paid. I always talk about Vizio in class. Vizio TVs has 600 employees. They generate $43 million per employee. It's a lot of money. Most small businesses generate maybe $300,000 to $400,000 per employee. They do, 1,000 times that. But they have a system. Their system is they design the TVs. Their company makes them, ships them directly to the retailers. They don't have to inventory anything. The companies pay the distributor directly. Well, they pay Vizio directly, and then they pay their manufacturer and take their cut off the top. But they generate $42 million, or $42 to $43 million per employee, which is very unique in the industry. But they also don't have to have warehouses. They have no shipping costs because, again, it's built into the delivery of the product. And when they pay for them, they pay the manufacturer. But yeah, they're not making 100% of that money, but investors like to see how many dollars you generate. And even though you don't get to keep them all, and we'll look at that more when we get into the finances, but they like to know that there's a lot of money that's coming in. This is why in industry we were looking at how many billions of again, the B word is always a big thing to have in your business plan, because if you can show that your industry makes $1 billion, you've got you're 1% of that business. That's $10 million a year in revenue. That's pretty good. So they like to know that you're a big industry, and but they also like to know that you understand the ins and the outs, and the good and the bad of your business. And like I said, the two key weaknesses, two key strengths, two key weaknesses, you can control those, and so you can offset them pretty easy, or use them as promotion. That's your strengths, but those are internal things. But there are, in your industry, what are the opportunities and threats you see? And this is, again, why you got to continually do research, keep an eye on the technology, keep an eye on, examples, music business. Who knew that live streaming was going to be that big 10 years ago? People were having fun buying CDs and albums, and boom, they went, well, we don't need to have anything physical anymore. That industry just dried up, and think about all the other companies that got sucked in with it. People that made turntables, people that made sound systems, cassette players, tape players, all those groups are gone. They were talking about VCRs, the way that DVDs are done now, because you have live streaming. Well, DVDs, they still make those, but we used to have have tapes, have VCR and Betamax tapes. They were talking about that the last manufacturer of those players just closed down. But you think they saw that on the wall? No, they didn't see the technology come. Yeah, and if they did, they would have to plan. We call it planned obsolescence. Eventually, they know that their business was going to go away. But in most cases, there's going to be a little bit of business, but is it enough to keep you alive? And is it enough to attract an investor? Because the investor is not just going to want you to survive. They want you to be profitable, because that's how they get paid. So focus on the two strengths, two weaknesses. Then think about, in your industry, what opportunities you see that could happen. That, again, they're not in your control, but there might be some legislation that's coming. There might be some development that's happening in another country that might affect businesses in the United States. Might be some new technology you're hearing about. I watch a website called New Atlas, which shows all the new toys. But most of those you won't see for 5 or 10 years. They're ideas. But in your industry, they might change the way we do things, the way we deliver our product. You know, think about the drones. Now there's going to be fun with those because of in Venezuela they tried to kill the president with bombs on a drone. So now people are going to be watching drones, uh, and you know what's it really trying to do? And they're using them in Iraq too. So it's again it's things that are just make life different, but you don't control that technology. And then the threats, again, watch your competitors, because if your competitors decide to get together to, you know, go up against you, you know, they could get legislation done. They could get zoning changed. You know, something like that's interesting because, you know, if you're looking for a new location, you know, and you want to be in a certain place, well, if it's not zoned for your type of business, you can't get it. And if you decide, well, I like it here, but I'm going to have it rezoned, they can challenge it. But you can't control that. But that zoning is an external factor that could keep you from setting up your business somewhere. But again, try to pick two of each. Uh, and again, you can put them in bullet form. Some people put them in table form. Just make sure any negatives, that's your weaknesses and your threats, those have to be offset. In other words, I need some solution. If you've identified a problem, how are you going to fix it in the future? Or how have you addressed it already? Because you never leave a negative on the table with the investor. Because once you do that, they're going to go, well, you know, you're raising the risk factor on their part, and they don't like that. So you're going to try to get rid of that. And again, those are the types of things that could affect your market share and your competitors. And again, looking at your competitors, you know, the opportunities, you might say, I'm going to form a trade group, you know, because I think that we've saturated the market. We don't need any more players. Well, you might decide you want to set a group up. That could be your opportunity. Um, it could be that you know, I have a guy who had a part that he would bid on for the government. It was only made by one company, so he went to that company and said, "I'll buy 2 years worth of your manufacturing." What do you mean? Says, "Nope, I want 2 years worth of this part, and that you promise me if I buy these that you won't make any more." They went, "Sure." So he bought 2 years worth of their parts. And then the government came out with a contract that required that part. Guess who was the only person who could bid on it? My guy at Tritech Electronics. But that was, you know, he looked at it and he said, "This is a way that I can keep people. This is a barrier to entry for my competitors." Nobody could bid on it but him because he owned all of those parts that were required by the government contract. And people couldn't, and there was no changing of the part as far as the contractors were concerned. But he had gotten kind of wind of, you know, this part was going to be needed, and he locked it up and he kept it. It was a threat to all of his competitors because there was nothing they could do about it because there's only this one company manufactured it. By the time somebody else could probably come up with it, you got to deal with patents and trademarks and all this kind of stuff. It wasn't worth their effort to do that, so nobody bid on it but him, so he could just charge whatever he wanted. And he was being fair because again, they could just say, "Well, we're not going to build it," but he was fair. But he knew that he would get the contract for the next 2 years. Um, so again, don't overthink the SWOT, but again, think about what internal things you can deal with and what external things. Okay, that's going to do it for this week. We're at an hour and 20 minutes. We will next week. Let me stop my video here. Okay.